On your mark. John felt his muscles tense as he prepared to move. Get set. This was his favorite part, the calm before the storm, and his muscles practically fluttered with anticipation. Go! John was off, his legs pumping as he took off from the block. He was the first off the line, as usual, and as he ran, he felt the exhilaration of the wind as it whipped past. He felt like Icarus when he ran, his legs pushing him faster and faster as he raced for the sun. He would not fall. He would not melt. And as he passed the line again, he heard the coach whistle as he checked the stopwatch. John was catching his breath for about 10 seconds before the next runner came jogging up, and John offered him a high five as he came up to stand beside him. He was fast, but he didn't want to rub it in. Great time today, Jay. Put on a show like that at Nationals next week, and you'll have colleges lining up around the block. Heck, that's not all, said Mr. Arnold, the assistant track coach. I heard there might be Olympic scouts there, recruiting for the games next year. John felt his mouth go dry. Whoa, Olympic scouts? That'd be a dream come true. John was only 17, but he had dreams of going to the Olympics since he was a little kid, running around the track behind his apartment. When he felt the wind rushing past his face, he always imagined that he was flying down the rough rubber track of the Olympic Stadium, the fans cheering as he took the curves like a race car and left his opponents in the dust. He was still thinking about it in the locker room as he left. Tom and Cedric came up excitedly, talking about the upcoming meet. Cedric was an alternate for the 50, but Tom had managed to get a spot on the third leg of the relay. It was a pretty important spot, and Tom was a little nervous about it. It was right before the home stretch, and he was afraid that he would mess it up. What if I trip? What if I drop the baton? What if I'm just not fast enough? John put a hand on his shoulder. You will be, T. You'll be fine. Your times are almost as good as mine. Right, only off by about 30 seconds. As they walked around, John glanced up at the stands and saw they had a guest. The man was dressed a little nicer than the average track enthusiast, his black suit looking too nice for the bleachers he was sitting in. He had a cane sitting between his knees, and his long white hair was hanging down around his face like a curtain. Even those locks couldn't hide his grin, though. It was wide, and John was afraid that it might split his face in two. His teeth were pearly white, like polished rocks in his gums, and he had a distinctly bitey look about him. "What's up, Jay?" Cedric said, following his gaze up to the bleachers. "Oh yeah, I've seen him a couple of times. I don't know if he's a scout or what, but he's been coming for the last few days. He's got to be a college scout or something," Tom said. "Why else would anyone else come out to a high school track practice?" "Could be a pervert," John said. But when the guy's eyes settled on him, he felt like if he was a pervert, then he was the kind that hurt you to get his rocks off. "I don't like the look of him. He looks off somehow, like someone wearing a costume." John agreed, walking to the parking lot as he headed for his pickup. He was tired, but it was that good kind of tired that came after a hard run. He'd go home, have a soak, get ready for bed, have a good night's sleep before tomorrow. It was Thursday, the meet taking place on Saturday, and he'd have a nice long run tomorrow after school to make sure that his engines were primed for the next day. It was going to be a good Saturday. The coffee shop was busy on Friday morning. John wasn't a big coffee drinker. Caffeine was a drug, no matter what they said. But St. John's Beans made the best health smoothies in town. Smoothie King was okay, but St. John's Beans used fresher ingredients, and John liked that. His body was a temple, and he liked to treat it as such. If he treated it well, then it would treat him in kind. Melanie smiled at John as he came in. "The usual? I think I'm going to go with the banana protein today. Got a meet coming up, and I want to be ready. Cedric was in here for his usual triple shot of espresso this morning, and said there might be Olympic scouts there." "Could be," John said, trying to make it sound nonchalant. "What you gonna do if you have to choose between the Olympics and some prestigious college that needs a guy who can run fast?" "Shoot, I'm going to the Olympics. That's not even a question." Even though there might be other options? Came a smooth voice from behind him. Melanie looked up with a smile, but it seemed to pickle as she caught sight of the man. John had never seen such a visceral reaction to anyone, and when he turned, he understood why. The man looked almost angelic with the bright white light of the windows arrayed behind him, but when John got a full blast of him, the illusion was broken. As the man stepped forward, John realized it was the same man that had been sitting in the stands the day before. He extended a hand. John McCann, the track star of St. Francis Charter School. It's truly an honor to meet you. Likewise, John said, forcing himself to reach out and take the extended hand. He didn't want to. He wanted nothing so much as to refuse it, and as he gripped it, it felt like a bird's wing. The bones moved weirdly beneath the skin, and when John let go, the man's smile was huge. I was hoping to get a chance to talk with you before the big meet on Saturday. John moved aside, letting the man make his order, and when he turned back, John tried to fix his face so that it looked normal. You some kind of agent or something? John asked, trying to get interested. I am. I work for Libris Talent, and we would like to inquire whether or not your talent is for sale. John looked at him funny, not sure what he was talking about. Was he asking to represent him? Trying to become his agent? John didn't really want to work for someone like this man, but if the money was right, he supposed he could look past it. His mom was working 2 jobs for his tuition, and some extra money would be nice right about now. Well, I could be looking for representation. What are you offering? We want to manage your talent. Maybe put it into hands that can better mold it. We will pay you handsomely for it, more than compensate you for your considerable talent. John thought about it, sipping his smoothie as he tried to look anywhere but at the man. I don't believe I've ever heard of Libris Talent before. Are you guys new? Well, we used to only cover literary talents, hence the name, but we've been branching out as of late. Why just handle literary talent when we could offer talent of all sorts? Now, we can be the premier talent agency for all needs. How much are we talking about as a sign-on? John asked, still seeing dollar signs. The man pulled a piece of paper out of his coat pocket, scribbling something on it with a golf pencil, before sliding it across the table. John looked, his eyes getting big as he read the zeros. It's very generous, the man said. A little too generous, John said. What exactly would you expect of me? We're buying your talent, John. That's all we expect of you, to show us. Meet me here if you're interested. He handed him an address that turned out to be the school track where he had run just that day. We'll be waiting there at 8 p.m., with your check, of course. He got up then, leaving his drink on the counter, and John couldn't help but watch him go as he left the shop. Usually people give their names when they make deals, he shot back. When the man turned back, John wished he had just let him go away, instead of getting the full attention of that shark-like grin. Richard T. Seraph. Don't be late, my boy, he said, speaking his name as if it were a spell. So the dude from the bleachers yesterday turns out to be from an agency, Cedric asked as he came into the lunchroom at noon. Mm-hmm, John said distractedly. The number the man had given him had been his worry stone all day, and he'd been distractedly rubbing at it. He couldn't focus, couldn't get his head around things, and as the day went on, he considered just going home. He wasn't going to get anything out of today's lessons, no matter how hard he tried, and he might as well go home and rest for tomorrow. Maybe, he reflected, it was tonight that he was resting for and not Saturday. But that was too much to think about. If his body was a temple, then there was a whirlwind inside it right now. You gonna go? Asked Tom. Dunno, John said, still distracted as he rubbed at the paper. He sat with his lunch tray and only then noticed that he hadn't put any food on it. Cedric laughed as he noticed too, but John found that he wasn't really feeling hungry. He didn't like this. He wasn't used to feeling this way. John had always been in control of his thoughts, of his body, and his sudden lack of control was more than a little upsetting. I think I'm going to knock off early today, John said suddenly, getting up from the table as he took his empty tray to the bucket. Cedric and Tom followed behind him, asking what was wrong, but John told them that he was just feeling off. He wanted to go rest. He wanted to be fresh for tomorrow. He had a lot to think about and just needed to clear his head. They said they'd see him later, and when he went to the office, the lady winked at him as if it was all a big joke. "Sure, track star. Knock 'em dead tomorrow," she said, handing him a pass. John thanked her, walking to the lot as he drove through town to get back home. His mother's car was in the driveway, and that was surprising since he hadn't actually seen his mother since Monday night. When she wasn't working as a housekeeper at Rancho Bonita off the highway, then she was working as a waitress at the Starlight Diner. She worked 16 to 18 hours a day and crawled in late almost every night after he'd gone to bed. She did this because John's father had decided one day, about 3 years ago, to up and leave without a word. He left no note, told no one where he was going, and suddenly it was just the two of them. John offered to get a job, but his mother wouldn't hear of it. "You keep running, sweetie. You keep running all the way to college and the Olympics and wherever else your legs will take you. Do whatever it takes to make your dreams come true. And when you get there, remember the people that got you there." He came inside to find his mother slumped over on the couch, snoring softly as the TV played quietly. She'd gotten off early from her job at the hotel and seemed she'd been watching a little TV before her shift started at the diner. She had one shoe off, the other still up on the table, when her exhaustion had taken her. John took the old Afghan off the back of the couch and draped it over her before calling Henry at the diner and telling him his mother was feeling under the weather. "She's been working herself too hard and picked up a cold or something. She's running a fever, and I think it might be best if she took a day to recover." Henry sighed, but he understood. "I keep telling her she's got sick days for a reason. She just wants to do right by you, kid. She wants to give you the best. Tell her I hope she's feeling better tomorrow. She said she was coming in a little late so she could watch you at your big meet. Knock 'em dead, kiddo." John smiled as he hung up the phone and went into the kitchen to start dinner. When his mother came awake suddenly, sounding like a deep-sea diver coming up for air, she rushed into the kitchen like a bat out of hell. "Jesus, John, why'd you let me sleep so late? I'm going to be in so much trouble. Henry'll fire me for sure. I have to hurry. I have to—" "It's okay, Mom. I called Henry and told him you were feeling under the weather. He said it was fine. Said he would use one of your sick days to cover for it. You rest. You've earned a little time to recuperate." John had just been taking the pork chops off the stove, the green beans and mashed potatoes already done, and when he sat the plate down in front of her, his mom looked surprised. "Johnny, when did you have time to do all this?" John turned away, not wanting to see the disappointment when he told her that he'd come home early. I just left school a little early today. I was having some trouble focusing and thought it might be best if I got my head right for tomorrow." He couldn't see the disappointment, but he could hear it when she spoke. "John, you have to take your studies more seriously. What if they don't let you compete tomorrow because you missed the test, or—" "My grades are fine, Mom. I'm not going to be valedictorian or anything, but I'll pass. When I go to college, it won't just be for my running times either. I'll get there on my own merit. I can't run forever, after all," he added with a wink. His mom nodded, tucking into her dinner as John finished his. He looked at the clock on the stove and realized it was creeping up on 8 o'clock. Watching his mother eat, John had decided to take the deal, regardless of what the old man looked like. He kissed his mom on the forehead, going upstairs to get ready. "Where are you off to so late?" she asked, 10 minutes later when he was heading out in his running gear. "I need to do something. I'll be back soon. I love you, Mom." He kissed the top of her head again and headed for the door. Seeing her like this made it all the easier to decide what was right. Mr. Seraph was waiting for him when he arrived, his smile back in place. "You came. I thought for certain you would." John nodded, the lights making him look even harsher in the hazy illumination. "Yeah, so what am I here for?" "Why, to run, of course. Running is your talent, and if we're to have it, then you must do it." John stepped back. "Run? Run where? You've seen me run already. What are you—" But when he looked back, there was a book in Mr. Seraph's hand. The book looked old, eldritch in its fragility, and the binding looked like it meant to bite, just as much as the owner. "Sign your name." Sign your name in the book, and all will be explained. John suddenly felt like the last thing he wanted to do was sign that book. The longer he watched, the more it seemed to breathe. The longer he looked, the more it seemed to hunger for him. He could see a pen in Mr. Seraph's other hand, and as he hesitated, he thought again about his mother's tired face. Didn't she deserve to be happy for a change? Didn't she deserve a rest? The pen was cold as he grabbed it, and the ink seemed to move across the paper as he signed his life away. He didn't know why he had thought of it that way, but he almost chuckled as he did. He could always quit if he didn't like the representation. "Now," Mr. Seraph said, "get out there and run." All at once, John found that he did want to run. His blood was up. The night air had filled him with a kind of secret strength he didn't know he had. He wanted to run. He wanted to fall on all fours and fly. He wanted to feel the wind rush past him as he reveled in the exaltation of the moment. He was a hunter. He was the prey, and he would run until he couldn't anymore. Suddenly he was on the track. His shoes were gone, and the blacktop felt strange beneath his bare feet. He got down into the starting position, listening for the imaginary pistol shot in his head, and as it sounded, he took off up the track. He couldn't see it, judging the track by the islands of light at a glance. He ran from one island to the next, his feet slapping at the rubber as fast as they would go. The wind whipped past him as he ran, his feet hitting the ground like pistons. He was running faster than he'd ever run. He was running faster than he had ever thought possible, and as he cleared the first lap, he truly felt like Icarus as he flew. He went round and round and round, once and twice and 3 times and 4 times, until his breath was coming out like a bellows in a lunatic factory. His legs began to burn, his veins throbbing as they pushed. His knees creaked like an old man's. His feet had stopped slapping and began to plop as they left wet streaks. His legs hurt, his skin cracking, and he ran on and on and on. His exhilaration was becoming confusion, and John became aware that he could not stop. His legs refused to stop pumping, his feet refused to stop working, and as he rounded the corner, he felt like he would go skipping across the hot top like a hockey puck at any minute. He was still flying, his legs running on autopilot, and when the veins burst in his calf, he limped on only a single time before running again. His muscles stood out like the muscles of a horse, and when his tendons cramped badly, he ran on despite it. He screamed as the muscles began to shred themselves, separating from the bones and tendons as they unraveled. He had learned about this, how his legs had worked, in biology class, but it was amazing how they seemed to unravel like yarn as he pulled himself to pieces. He staggered, his legs still trying to move, and when he finally fell, the concrete ate him up as he bounced across it. He came to rest within a puddle of light, his body throbbing as his bruised lungs tried to pull in air and scream. His legs were thankfully going numb, but it was hardly a comfort. He passed out with his cheek against the concrete, bleeding and throbbing in impotent pain. That was where they found John. The volunteers had just arrived to begin setting up the meet when they found his broken form lying on the track. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was already done. It was a great tragedy, a blow to the town sports program. John was hospitalized, his legs mostly pulp at this point. His tendons were shredded, his muscles frayed, and the prognosis was grim. He would likely never walk again, the doctors said, and they had to amputate one of his legs due to the damage it had suffered. No one could quite explain what had happened to him, or how he had gotten in such a state. But when the check arrived in the mailbox the next day, his mother was at a loss for words. It would cover his medical bills 100 times over, but the note in the envelope was what disturbed John the most. Libris Talent would like to thank you for your talent. We do hope your payment will help you in your time of need. Warmest regards, R.T. Seraph. P.S. Don't miss the Olympics next year. I'm sure someone will want to thank you at their medal ceremony. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.